What's going on, everyone? We are back. We have made it to the last week of the regular season, week 17. It's bittersweet, but at least we have got the playoffs coming. Nonetheless, as always, I have got my weekly NFL game picks outright on the spread along with my locks of the week. Hopefully, we'll be able to have some success this week, even though we're expecting to see a lot of key players sit. So it will be very intriguing, but enough of that. Let's get right into it. Kicking things off, we go to our first of 16 divisional matchups on Sunday, and we have the Atlanta Falcons at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Falcons 6-9 after beating the Carolina Panthers last week without Cam Newton, and that game pretty much went as we expected. The Falcons had a good day offensively and defensively to get them the W. Then the Bucs, 5-10, ultimately losing to the Dallas Cowboys. Somewhat close of a game, but the Bucs fell short. And now in this week's clash, personally, I favor the Atlanta Falcons here, and first and foremost, I would have to say it starts with the quarterback position, and that's going to be what we look at in every single one of these games here because it's week 17, and everyone knows that starters are likely to be sat in these games, but from everything that I've read, Matt Ryan is not expected to be benched, so for that reason, as long as he is under center, I favor the Atlanta Falcons here. If something does change, then I would say that things definitely swing in favor of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Even if Julio Jones doesn't play in this game since he's been questionable these last couple of weeks, I still like the Atlanta Falcons. I think here they're going to try and get a couple of nice victories towards the end of the season, make their season look a little bit nicer than it was because if you think about it, it was a very underwhelming and disappointing season for the Atlanta Falcons considering how much talent they have offensively and what the expectations were. So maybe getting some of these victories towards the last couple of weeks will at least brighten things up for them. And then for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I do think they'll keep it close. Look, in these divisional matchups, it usually is the case. The Bucs have an offense that can go ahead and score a lot of points. We know the Falcons' defense has had a lot of issues, but they are getting healthier. For me, right now, the thing with the Buccaneers is I think they just have so many questions to be answered heading into this season. That's going to be the biggest thing for me to keep track with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. What will they do in the offseason? But for now, I like the Falcons to win this matchup on Sunday outright. On the spread, Bucs are actually favored at -1.5. Since I like the Falcons outright, I will take them on the spread as well. Next, we have the Miami Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills. The Dolphins 7-8 after the disappointing loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and then the Buffalo Bills 5-10 after losing to the New England Patriots. Ultimately, both these teams are done for the season. It has no playoff impact, and it's been like that here for several weeks for the Bills. For the Miami Dolphins, it was a more recent playoff exit as they were eliminated from the wild card. But the big storyline here, honestly, will be for the Miami Dolphins and whether Ryan Tannehill will be making his last start for the Dolphins this Sunday. Are the Dolphins going to move on from him and try and bring in someone new at the quarterback position? Regardless of what happens in the future with the Dolphins here, I actually like the Buffalo Bills. The first time these two teams played, the Bills kept it close. They ultimately ended up losing, but the way that the Dolphins have been trending these last 2 weeks, I think they have called it pretty much quits after they were eliminated from the wild card. And the Buffalo Bills, like we've said before, they've kept it close with other teams in recent weeks, and they've gotten some nice results, even though the Buffalo Bills right now aren't that great of a team. I don't think the Miami Dolphins are either. I think this will be a close game. I think it'll be a game that ultimately Buffalo wins because of what Josh Allen can do with his legs. And for that reason, I will take the Bills at home. That's another factor as well to win this matchup outright. On the spread, Bills -3.5 point favorites. The first time these two teams played, the Dolphins won by 4. I think it'll be a similar result this time for the Buffalo Bills. For that reason, I will take the Bills on the spread. Continuing on, we've got the Dallas Cowboys at the New York Giants. The Cowboys 9-6 after beating the Tampa Bay Bucs last week face a Giants team that is 5-10 and actually coming off a pretty good performance, even though it was in a loss versus the Indianapolis Colts, where man, they really made the Colts work for it. But ultimately, Andrew Luck leading that game-winning touchdown drive, and even though Eli Manning had a chance to lead the Giants to their own game-winning touchdown drive or field goal attempt, he ends up throwing a game-ending interception. And unfortunately, it's been that type of season for Eli and for the Giants. And now in this week's matchup, look, the bright side for the Giants, if they're looking to get this victory, is that the Cowboys already have the division locked up. They've got their seeding locked up. They can't improve anything there. So I wouldn't be surprised if Dak or Zeke or Amari Cooper are sat. As far as any of those reports, I haven't seen any trickling in. If they do play, I don't think they will play the entire game, more so 1 or 2 quarters. Then for the New York Giants, they will be without Odell Beckham, but that has been the case for several weeks now. They've still got Saquon Barkley. They've got Eli Manning. It'll be interesting to see how those things transition into next season. But as far as this matchup is concerned, I actually like the Giants outright. I think because Prescott and Zeke and Cooper won't play the entirety of this game, the Giants have the distinct advantage. I also expect the Cowboys to sit some key players defensively, but ultimately, the spread is what scares me here. The Giants are favored by -6.5, even though I do think they will win. That number that's close to a touchdown scares me in this divisional matchup with a Giants team that has been all over the place this season versus a Cowboys team that knows them so well and where the strength is the defense. Even though, I expect fully the Cowboys starters to not go ahead and finish this game, I do think they will be able to stay in the game long enough to impact the score in a way that the Cowboys will cover the spread ultimately. Moving on, we've got the Detroit Lions at the Green Bay Packers. The Lions, 5-10 after losing to the Vikings last week, face a Packers team that's 6-8-1 that just beat the New York Jets in overtime. A pretty entertaining offensive scoring game as far as that goes. But ultimately, as far as this week's matchup is concerned, I don't think we're going to see that same type of performance, especially from the Lions, considering the second half of the season, they have really struggled offensively, but that's what happens after the Kerryon Johnson injury, after the Marvin Jones injury, after the Golden Tate trade. And unfortunately, it's been that type of underperforming season that has made it a disappointing 2018 for the Lions. We'll see what happens with Matt Patricia, but that's a discussion for another time. For the Packers, I do think Aaron Rodgers will start this game. Heck, he started in Week 16. He could have very well sat a week ago, so I don't anticipate anything changing there. And I think he finishes this game. I think Jamal Williams has a nice outing at Lambeau. I think this is going to be a really nice opportunity to see what some of those lesser-known Green Bay wide receivers can do. A core outside of Devontae Adams that still has a lot of question marks. I wouldn't be surprised if the Green Bay defense also has a nice day versus the Detroit Lions. And all in all these things to me add up to a Green Bay victory outright at home. The spread -7.5 for Green Bay, a little bit high, but ultimately with Aaron Rodgers most likely playing this game, I will go ahead and say the Packers cover the spread and win by at least double digits. Next, we've got the New York Jets at the New England Patriots. The Jets, 4-11 after losing in Green Bay last week, face a Patriots team that's 10-5, just beat the Buffalo Bills, and that game script pretty much went exactly as we predicted. Featured the excellent rushers of New England in Ridley and James White. Tom Brady didn't really have to do much through the air, but I do think this week could be different because with Sam Darnold under center for the New York Jets, they, in my opinion, have a higher scoring offensive potential than a team like the Buffalo Bills. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think the Jets are going to have that same type of offensive explosion as they did last week, especially on the road in New England of all places, but I do think Brady will have to throw it a little bit more so than he did last week, and as far as Patriots fans are concerned, I think that would be very welcomed for them because even though this game doesn't really mean that much as the New England Patriots got a lot of help from the Houston Texans after they lost in Week 16, so that pretty much means the Patriots, barring some type of unexpected loss, should have a bye heading into the playoffs in the AFC. That's a huge win for them. We know how valuable those byes can be, and just giving the Patriots some more time to get healthy. But ultimately, what matters here is to see some type of progression passing the football from Tom Brady. He hasn't exactly looked like Tom Brady in that category these last couple of weeks. And as far as Gronk is concerned, man, don't even get me started on him because where has he been these last couple of weeks? Even though he's been on the field, he hasn't really done anything. We all know how valuable he is for this offense. We all know how many mismatches he can create, but that hasn't really been happening, and he is such an integral part to the New England Patriots and for a playoff push for them to occur that I would love to see him returning and be relevant, as I'm sure a lot of New England Patriots fans would agree. So here's hoping to that. Ultimately, I will take the Patriots to win this game outright. On the spread, however, minus 13.5, that is a little bit high for me. I do think the Patriots will win this game, and they could very well cover the spread, but in my opinion, I think the Jets make it a little bit closer. To me, the Patriots win by right around 10 to 12 points, and that means the Jets on the spread for me. Next, we've got the Carolina Panthers at the New Orleans Saints. The Panthers 6-9 after losing to the Atlanta Falcons, but that was pretty much expected. We knew Cam Newton wasn't going to play. Tyler Heineke got the start. Ultimately, he got injured, and now the Panthers are going to be with yet another different quarterback versus the New Orleans Saints. And speaking of the Saints, they are 13-2 after beating the Pittsburgh Steelers last week. I've been saying it all year long. To me, they are the top team in the NFC, quite possibly in the NFL. And last week should serve as a case in point example. Considering how much that game meant for the Steelers, it makes what the Saints did even that much more impressive. And even though the Saints might be without Drew Brees and some other pieces, well, as a matter of fact, we know they'll be without Drew Brees and some offensive linemen, Teddy Bridgewater will still get the start. To me, he is a good backup quarterback, one of the better ones. And honestly, I think he could start for some certain NFL teams at this point in time, and they would do better than what they have done up until this point. So I still expect the New Orleans Saints to be better than the Panthers offensively. The Panthers, as long as they're not bringing out Cam Newton at the quarterback position, which we obviously know won't be the case, they won't be able to match up quarterback to quarterback versus the Saints. And as good as Christian McCaffrey is offensively, he won't be able to shoulder the entire load and will the Panthers to a victory. As much as I would love to see that, and as much as Christian McCaffrey has improved this year, make no mistakes about it, he is a stud, but he alone will not be able to lead the Panthers to victory. They will also be missing guys like Trey Turner, K'Wan Short. Those are important pieces for the Panthers on the offensive line and on the defensive line. Also, consider the New Orleans home field advantage factor here. I do think that will play a certain piece in this matchup. And all these things to me add up to a New Orleans Saints victory. I like them outright, pretty confident in that. On the spread, the Saints are favored minus 10.5, a little bit high, but ultimately I think Teddy Bridgewater is just so much better than what the Carolina Panthers have offensively, and he's just going to want to put on a show considering he, like I said, can be a starter in this league and should be, in my opinion, that I think he's going to put up a bunch of points versus this Panthers defense, and the Saints ultimately cover the spread as well. Moving on, we've got the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Houston Texans. The Jaguars 5-10 after beating the Dolphins last week, now face the Texans team that's 10-5 and just suffered a heartbreaking loss to the Eagles, considering what it could have meant for their playoff bye week hopes. Instead, now that honor will likely go to the New England Patriots unless they lose and the Texans win. So without a doubt, the Texans will be paying very close attention to the Jets and Patriots matchup, and I do think it will dictate how long the Texans keep their starters in for. If the Patriots are blowing out the Jets, then wouldn't be surprised if heading into the third and fourth quarter, the Texans go ahead and put in some of those backups offensively and defensively, and most likely that is what I would bet on. Now for the Jaguars, Blake Bortles set to start this game. At this point in time with Blake Bortles, I don't think people really know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but for the simple reason that the Houston Texans will, in my opinion, like I said, barring that New England matchup and how it goes, rest some guys. I think the Jaguars will have an opportunity to make this score closer than it should be. Now look, I still like the Texans to win this game. They are the better football team. I think Blake Bortles will make some mistakes as usual, and ultimately the Texans win outright. But on the spread, minus 7.5, that is a little bit too high for me. I would love it if it was right around minus 5.5, something like that. Then I would take the Texans, but because it is just over a touchdown, I will take the Jaguars. I think the Texans start resting their guys, and ultimately the Jaguars get some garbage time points and cover the spread on their end. Next, we've got the Chicago Bears at the Minnesota Vikings. The Bears 11-4 after beating the 49ers last week face a Vikings team that's 8-6-1 and just beat the Detroit Lions. Now, talk about a game that has a ton of implications as far as playoff seeding is concerned. A lot of different scenarios here. I'm going to try and briefly touch all of them. And starting with the Bears at 11-4, they actually have a shot at the number 2 seed in the NFC, but that would mean they have to win and the Rams have to lose at home versus the 49ers. And I don't particularly see that happening, but since it is a possibility, make no mistakes about it, the Bears will be paying very close attention to that matchup. And if the Rams are blowing out the 49ers, then I do think once the third or fourth quarter hits, we will see Matt Nagy pull his big name guys like Trubisky, like Khalil Mack. And honestly, if you've been paying close attention to the Bears for the majority of the season, they honestly err on the side of caution. We saw it in the preseason where Nagy didn't really play his guys. We saw it with Khalil Mack and Allen Robinson when they erred on the side of caution versus some lesser opponents. And we saw it with Trubisky, who was sat for 2 games. So like I said, for that reason, it wouldn't shock me at all if the Bears go ahead and sit some of their guys. But where it gets really interesting is the Bears, to some extent, dictate who they could potentially play in the playoffs, because if they are playing that first week, they could play one of 3 teams. They could play the Vikings, they could play the Eagles, or they could play the Seattle Seahawks. Now, for them to go ahead and play the Vikings, the Minnesota Vikings would need to go ahead and win, and then the Seattle would also need to win. Personally, if I'm a Bears fan, I don't want to see that. I hate a situation where my team would have to play a divisional opponent for 3 times, and even more so 2 weeks in a row. And on top of that, Minnesota has a top-notch defense that I think could cause a lot of trouble for the Bears. And then for the Eagles, well, we know the Eagles are Super Bowl champion from last year. And for them to go ahead and play the Chicago Bears, then the Minnesota Vikings need to lose and the Eagles need to win. That's a possibility. And then lastly, for the Seattle Seahawks to potentially go to Chicago, well, the Minnesota Vikings would need to go ahead and win, and Seattle would need to lose to Arizona. I don't see that happening. To me, it's either going to be the Vikings or the Eagles. But as far as this matchup is concerned, I really do think that we will see guys being rested for the Bears. And obviously, we won't see that by the Minnesota Vikings, because for them, it's win and you are in to the playoffs. So I think they will be very motivated for this game. I think we're going to see them hitting on all cylinders offensively and defensively. Maybe it'll be a low-scoring game for the first part of it, while some of those big-name defensive guys are on the field for the Bears. But once we see some of those guys being sat, I think the Vikings could potentially really explode. And I like them to win this game in Minnesota outright, without a doubt. But on the spread, -5.5, I think that's low enough where even with that Bears defense, once we see some of those guys being sat, the Vikings will be able to cover that spread as well. Next, we've got the Cincinnati Bengals at the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Bengals, 6-9 after losing to the Browns last week, face a Steelers team that is 8-6-1, coming off a heartbreaking loss to the New Orleans Saints, a game that was back and forth, but ultimately the comeback attempt came up short for the Steelers with that Juju Smith fumble. Would have been interesting to see what would have happened if that didn't occur, but alas, right now the Steelers, believe it or not, are on the outside looking in as far as playoffs go, and honestly, what they need here is some degree a miracle from the Cleveland Browns of all teams to go into Baltimore and beat the Ravens there on top of the Steelers beating the Cincinnati Bengals. That's why I'm calling this the honorary. So you're telling me there's a chance game. You know, it might not be that likely, but there is an outside shot, and that's what the Steelers are hoping for here. But the first part of that equation being the Steelers beating the Bengals, I think that is a no-brainer. I think that is a given, and I think they will do so in dominant fashion. I like the Steelers outright to get this victory. I think offensively they're going to put on a show. As far as the spread goes, the Steelers -14.5, and even though that seems like a big number, like I said, I think right now the Steelers are going to be 100% motivated to beat the Bengals, and that's going to translate into a big victory the way that I see it. The Bengals are just so hurt, and they have been for a while. I think the Steelers win by at least 15 points, so give me the Steelers on the spread as well. Continuing on, and speaking of the Browns and Ravens, that's the matchup we have next. Cleveland at Baltimore. The Browns, 7-7-1 after beating the Bengals last week, face a Ravens team that is 9-6, coming off that huge victory versus the LA Chargers. A result that probably not a lot of people saw playing out that way, including myself, but behind that dominant defense, the Ravens took care of business. And look, make no mistakes about it, for the Ravens, this is a huge game as well, because for them, it's pretty much a win-get-in situation as well, because if they lose, the Steelers will likely win their matchup. So Baltimore needs to come out and come swinging in this game. They can't afford to sit anyone, and I don't think they will. We're going to see all of their top guys here, and they're going to need it because Baker Mayfield has put on a show with the Browns as of late with that mojo. Obviously, the Browns have improved a little bit since their coaching changes. There has been new life in that team. And I do think the Browns might give the Ravens a little bit of a scare. They did beat them the first time they played, but the Ravens a much different team since then with Lamar Jackson. I do think he adds another element into that offense. I think the Ravens defense has improved since then as well. And even though the Browns have improved, I think that the Ravens will get this victory. I think it'll be probably lower scoring. I think it'll be hard fought. And I think it'll be close, but ultimately the Ravens get the W and head to the playoffs. On the spread, Ravens -6.5. I think that's a little bit too high. I think this will be in the realms of 3 to 4 point margin of victory for Baltimore, so I will actually take the Browns on the spread. Moving on, we've got the LA Chargers at the Denver Broncos. The Chargers, 11-4 after losing to the Ravens last week, face a Broncos team that's 6-9 and also coming off a loss to the Oakland Raiders. And breaking down this matchup, important matchup in theory for the Chargers because they could still win the division if the Chiefs go ahead and lose. But I don't see that happening considering the Chiefs are playing Oakland in Kansas City. That's why that loss versus the Ravens meant so much for the Chargers after Kansas City also lost to Seattle, because if they had gone ahead and beaten the Ravens, they would have seized control of the division. Instead, they're still tied, and the Chiefs hold control of the division and of the first seed overall in the AFC. Then the Denver Broncos, 6-9, losing the Raiders. It was a tough loss, a game that I thought would go in favor of the Broncos, but after that injury to Philip Lindsay, that was a huge loss for them because he was such a big part of the rushing success they have had offensively. They could only do so much, and I think it'll be a situation similar to that versus the Chargers, even though I expect the Chargers to go ahead and sit some of their guys depending on how the KC matchup goes. I do think Broncos right now are just hurting at a lot of really important positions, and they won't have enough firepower to go ahead and catch up to the lead that the Chargers have built. For that reason, I like the Chargers outright, but I also like them on the spread. The Broncos are +6.5. To me, the Chargers will be able to go ahead and win by at least a touchdown in this game. Moving on, and speaking of the aforementioned Oakland and Kansas City matchup, that's what we have here. The Raiders, 4-11 after beating the Broncos, face the Chiefs, who are 11-4 and just lost to the Seattle Seahawks. And all of a sudden now, this is a couple of losses for the Kansas City Chiefs, something we didn't see early on in the season. Will this issue follow them into the playoffs? We will find out, but for now, what their main focus here is just closing out the division, closing out the situation with the first seed overall, and I do think it will be done without any issues. Look, the Kansas City Chiefs, they are one of the top offenses in this league. Patrick Mahomes should win the MVP, and with Tyreek Hill, with Travis Kelce, with whoever's playing at running back, they have still been putting up points left and right, and they should do so versus the Oakland Raiders as well. I think they get this victory in Kansas City, and I think they will win this game by double digits. Now, where it really gets interesting to see is if they're going to sit their guys late in this game, because that's what's really going to affect the spread more than anything outright. Obviously, I think a lot of people will be taking the Chiefs, including myself, on the spread, -13.5, a little bit high, right under the 2 touchdown mark. I'm going to go ahead and say the Chiefs probably leave their starters in at least until the third quarter, or maybe middle point of the fourth quarter. For that reason, I do think they will cover the spread and they will get the over on the points. I think they win by at least 2 touchdowns, so give me Kansas City on the spread as well. Next, we've got the San Francisco 49ers at the LA Rams. The 49ers are 4-11 after losing to the Bears last week. Now face a Rams team that is 12-3 after beating the Cardinals. And no Todd Gurley, no problem for them, as CJ Anderson went ahead and dominated the Cardinals. And guess what? He's going to have to do it again in Week 17, as Gurley has been ruled out yet again. But even if CJ doesn't have as dominant of a game here, I still think the Rams will be victorious, and will be victorious in a dominant fashion. To me, they just have so many more pieces offensively, and I think their defense, even though it has been getting shredded for a while now this season, I think they will have a lot of success versus an inexperienced Nick Mullins. I think we're going to see Aaron Donald have several sacks in this game, but more importantly, I think we're going to see the ultra-aggressive Sean McVay really come out here, because the situation of players getting rested for some other teams, while we might see it being played out there, I just don't see a situation where McVay pulls his guys, considering that he obviously knows that if the Rams lose, there is an outside shot that they go ahead and miss out on that all-important bye week. So for that reason, and considering that Gurley is a little bit banged up, I think that Sean McVay will be all guns a-blazing and dominate the 49ers. For that reason, I will take the Rams at home to win this game outright. On the spread, -9.5, honestly a little bit lower than I thought. I would have even taken the Rams as double-digit point favorites. So this makes my decision even a little bit easier. I will take the Rams outright. I think they ultimately win this game by double digits. Continuing on, we have got the Philadelphia Eagles at the Washington Redskins. The Eagles 8-7 after beating the Houston Texans in the last minutes of that game with that game-winning field goal. Faced the Redskins, who are 7-8 coming off that loss, a game that was closer than the final score indicated versus the Tennessee Titans. And now for this matchup, man, the Eagles, it seems like when they're led by Nick Foles, they just can't lose. But maybe some of that magic for St. Nick has finally run out, because here the Eagles not only need to win, but they also need that outside help from the Chicago Bears. And I'm not sure they're going to get both of those things to work out for them. Now, I think a lot of people are ultimately assuming that the Eagles are going to win this game no issues, but I actually wouldn't be surprised if the Redskins cause the Eagles some problems here. We saw it the week before. The Redskins were a tough out for the Tennessee Titans, and that was a Titans team that was playing in a very important game, just like the Eagles are here. I think the Redskins can go ahead as a divisional opponent for the Eagles, cause them some trouble. Ultimately, however, I will say the Eagles win this game. They are healthier at this point in time at the more important positions. Darren Sproles is starting to hit a little nice stride, and I will take the Eagles outright. However, on the spread, +6.5 for the Redskins, I'm actually going to take Washington here, because I think that the Eagles, if they win, it's going to be less than a touchdown type of difference. For that reason, I think the Redskins put a little bit of a scare into the Eagles, and they really make them work for it. I will take the Redskins on the spread. Next, we've got the Arizona Cardinals at the Seattle Seahawks. The Cardinals, 3-12 after losing to the LA Rams, face a Seattle team that is 9-6 in all types of hot after beating the Kansas City Chiefs. And I've been saying it for a while now. Look out for this Seahawks squad. At home, they can beat anyone, and they have proven it. And honestly, they're not a team that I would want to face in the playoffs. I think they can really do some damage. And in this game included, Russell Wilson looking legit. And we've seen this for a while now. You know, the Seahawks start a little bit slow and then finish strong, and that's really been the case here for them. Russell Wilson, these last couple of games alone, he's looked like an MVP candidate. Obviously, it's too little too late for him in that consideration, but with the duo of Chris Carson, who's over 1,000 yards offensively, and Doug Baldwin, who has been dominant these last 2 weeks and finally looking healthy, I think Seattle can go ahead and compete with a lot of offenses in this league, and the Cardinals should be no opponent for them. I will take Seattle to go ahead and win this game outright. On the spread, I'm not going to overthink this too much. I know it's a high number, -12.5, but I will take the Seattle Seahawks to cover. I'd be a little bit concerned if the game was in Arizona. Maybe I would think twice about it, but I'd go ahead, take the Seattle Seahawks outright. And on the spread, obviously there's some playoff scenarios here in the NFC to keep your eyes out for, but I do think Seattle ultimately, whatever happens, will win this game both ways. And finally, getting to Sunday Night Football, we have got the Indianapolis Colts at the Tennessee Titans. Both these teams coming off victories. Both these teams 9-6. Both these teams fighting for a final playoff spot. Win and you're in. And truly, this is the only game this entire week that both these teams have something to play for, and something very significant at that. That's why it is our Sunday night game. And in this game, even though the Colts, they really kind of didn't look that good for a while versus the New York Giants, and they really had to work at it to come back and get the victory. I prefer them over the Tennessee Titans, who maybe had on paper a more impressive victory versus the Washington Redskins. But the fact of the matter is Marcus Mariota got a little bit banged up there. Now he is expected to play in this game, which is obviously a big plus for them. But ultimately, the Colts, Andrew Luck, they have had the number of the Tennessee Titans for a while now, and I think that will continue. I like Andrew Luck versus this Tennessee Titans defense. I'll still take Luck on the road. I just don't think that the Tennessee Titans offense has enough weapons to really go ahead and compete with Andrew Luck, who, again, to me, he's an MVP candidate, and I do think he will go to Tennessee and to some extent shred that defense. I do think it could potentially be a little bit closer. I do think ultimately the Colts separate themselves late in the fourth quarter. I'm going to go ahead, take the Colts outright on the spread. Pretty close here at +1.5. One of the closer spreads of the week, but ultimately I do think the Colts can win by at least a field goal. So give me the Colts on the spread and for them to move on to the playoffs. So with that, we finish up our pick'em games. Now looking at our locks of the week, we start with the New York Jets at the New England Patriots, and you're going to see a pattern here because I'm going to be focusing on teams that need to go ahead and win to keep some playoff hopes alive or playoff seeding alive, and that is definitely the case for the New England Patriots, as they have a shot at keeping the number 2 seed in the AFC and having home field advantage partially throughout the playoffs. And I think they get it done versus the New York Jets. I think Tom Brady has a little bit of a bounce back performance, even though it hasn't been pretty as of late. I think the Patriots get back on track here and beat the Jets. Next, Cincinnati at Pittsburgh. Even though the Pittsburgh Steelers need some outside help, I do think they will take care of business, at least in terms of what they can control, and that is beating the Bengals. I think we're going to see at least 30 points offensively from the Steelers. I will take Pittsburgh to win their game. Next, Oakland and Kansas City. Give me the Chiefs here. Again, they need to win this game in order to keep the first seed overall in AFC and home field advantage. For that reason, I think Patrick Mahomes, the MVP of the league, will beat the Oakland Raiders in Kansas City. Continuing on, San Francisco at the LA Rams. Give me the Rams here as well. Sean McVay will go ahead and keep the Rams focused on this game. He does not want any chances of them losing the number 2 seed. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Rams dominate this game. I think CJ Anderson will have another good game. And finally, Arizona at Seattle. The way Seattle has been playing as of late, I just think they are one of the top teams. They're one of the most dangerous teams. And with that trio of Russell Wilson, Chris Carson, and Doug Baldwin, I fully expect them to go ahead and beat the Arizona Cardinals. And with all that, we finish up our locks of the week as well. And as usual, let me know what you guys thought. Did you agree? Did you disagree? Let me hear it in the comments section, along with any other questions you guys might have. And as usual, if you guys enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in future videos.